Hello, everyone. We will get started here in a few moments, just giving everyone a chance to log on. Make sure we don't start without anyone. If you do want a copy of the slides today, they are attached as a handout, so please do snag those off of the handout section. They're attached as a PDF. If you do have any questions, all audio on your end has been muted, so type those into the chat box and we will address those as they come up, but just let me know if there's any questions. And again, we'll get started here. I'm gonna give it about another 2 minutes and we will get this ball rolling. Thank you very much for attending today. Alrighty, everyone, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you very much for tuning in with us today. We'll be covering the Checkbook Control IRA and some of the different structures, functions, and a few updates that have come up over the past years as we do this presentation every so often, maybe about once a quarter. So definitely some important things to take away if you have watched this before. So a few new pieces of information, and if you are new to this whole construct, well, you're in the right place. So again, thank you very much for joining with us. I want to make sure everyone knows that if you do have any questions, make sure you type those into the chat box because all audio on your end has been muted. And if you would like a copy of the slides, they are attached as a PDF handout to this presentation. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Alex Perny. I'm a business development specialist with Advanta IRA. I've been doing this since the beginning of 2012, so I have quite a bit of experience to kind of help guide and answer questions that you might have. If you do have any specific questions and you want to reach out afterwards, please feel free to give me a call. My number is directly up on the screen, or if you are just listening in, my number directly is 727-754-9954, and my email is aperny, that's APERNY @advantaira.com. Now, we will be covering some very specific items as it relates to tax filing, some specific LLC items. So just want to keep ensuring that you do understand our role in this whole process is that Advanta IRA and our employees do not provide investment advice, or do we endorse or promote any investment products. All information and materials are for educational purposes only, and all parties are encouraged to consult with their attorneys, accountants, and financial advisors before entering into any type of investment. A little bit about Advanta IRA. We do now have over 20 years. I should probably update that little snippet right there. We down our company back in November of 2003. Definitely odd to be saying that, but we have a lot of experience in doing this, and we've only ever been an alternative asset custodian. We've never been a broker dealer. Our expertise lies solely within the realm of self-directed and non-traditional assets. We have almost $3 billion of assets under administration at our firm alone, and it's strictly just within the realm of private LLCs, real estate, private stock, all the kind of things we're going to be covering today. That is the entirety of our AUM. And we're also very happy and proud of the services that we offer. We have dedicated account management for every single account here at Advanta IRA. So whether you're going the checkbook control route and really taking the keys to the kingdom and directing everything yourself, or you'd like to have us administer the assets directly, you do have personalized care that is applied to every single account, whether it's 5,000 or 5 million, you have that same great high level of service with no additional fees associated with it. Now, it's important, even though maybe some of you are familiar with what self-directed IRAs are, some of you maybe aren't. So we like to make sure we build a good base so that way we can get to the slightly more complex stuff at hand today with regard to LLCs and trust as they relate to IRAs. So what is a self-directed IRA? Yes, so just saw a question. Yes, that will be covered with regard to reporting. But so what is a self-directed IRA? It gives an IRA owner complete control over their retirement funds and investing decisions. Self-directed IRAs can be used for alternative assets to create and build retirement wealth and diversity. You truly can achieve a high degree of diversity with a self-directed IRA. Whereas with a traditional brokerage, yes, you might be invested in different types of industries, let's say mineral rights, let's say technology, manufacturing, but you're still within the same market archetype. You truly do get to branch out and invest in things that are outside of that market, such as real estate, private placements, precious metals, foreign currency, and much, much more with a self-directed IRA. So that's what we're talking about with a self-directed IRA. There are some brokerages out there that tout having a self-directed IRA, but really what they're referring to is simply just the aspects of being able to pick and choose your own stock. Self-direction in this context is talking about the alternatives that are available to you out there, such as real estate and private equities. Now, a lot of people maybe wonder why you haven't heard of a self-directed IRA. Well, it's nothing new. Since 1975, you've been able to do these types of investments. But since the investment custodians such as Advanta don't sell any investments, it's really up to the client to determine the suitability for this. And, at a very base level, it is a smaller barrier to entry just to open up an account and trade stocks within it. It's kind of what people are used to, but this isn't anything new or inherently, you know, so what I'm trying to get at is not something that's going to particularly go away. It has been well entrenched and ingrained that this is an acceptable way to invest your funds. And roughly only 4% of IRA investments are self-directed in the marketplace. So it's just a smaller segment of it. And it just takes a certain kind of person that really wants to take control and take back that franchise in their investing that really gravitates toward this. And certainly we are happy to promote that service and bring the education for you to make those decisions in webinars such as this. So we'll spend a little bit of time on this. Now, for whatever reason, I get this a lot, is that to do a particular type of self-directed investment, whether that be investing into a checkbook control LLC or buying real estate or investing in someone's commercial real estate syndication or private stock, whatever it may be that you have a use case for self-directed IRAs, I get it a lot that says, oh, you know what, I'd love to do this investment, but I don't have a Roth IRA. I need to do this through a Roth IRA. Well, Roth IRAs are an amazing type of plan, but they are not the only one that you can use. Roth IRAs being IRAs that you have front-loaded your tax payment, so you have paid tax on the seed and paid no tax on the fruit that you pick in retirement. But traditional IRAs, by a order of magnitude, are the most common type of IRA that we have at Advanta. And that's strictly speaking from the mechanism that people with old 401ks, old pension plans, any type of employer-sponsored plan are most likely going to be participating on a pre-tax basis, meaning that you are deducting the contributions that you put into that plan, and then in turn having a place for those funds to go when you leave that employer, they'll go into a traditional IRA. So I want to dispel the myth that you have to have a Roth IRA to do this. You absolutely don't. Traditional IRAs, again, are the most common type of account that we have at Advanta, followed shortly by the Roth, but again, just to make the point. Now, any of the types of plans that I have listed up here can be self-directed. Personally, I self-direct my own 401k at Advanta, and I also self-direct my own health savings account at Advanta as well. The health savings account is something I'm very passionate about, and I feel that a lot of people, if you have the correct type of healthcare plan, can really benefit from looking at. And a lot of people, they hear self-directed IRA, but they don't realize that other plan types, such as health savings accounts, can be self-directed as well, and they certainly can. We also have a lot of self-employed individuals or people that own owner-operated businesses, so things like SEP IRAs, simple IRAs, and individual solo 401k plans can also be self-directed to a very high degree of success if they have investments that they're looking to do, and they offer significantly higher contribution limits to the tune of a max contribution for individuals over the age of 50 and a half for a SEP IRA and individual 401k being almost $70,000. So it's definitely something looking into, especially if you are a self-employed individual and you're kind of scratching your head saying, you know what, it's great to be my own boss, but I miss out on those employer-sponsored plans. It's certainly not the case, and we can definitely help you out with that. So from your traditional IRA, your Roth IRA, SEP Simples, individual 401ks, health savings accounts, education savings accounts, all of these types of plans can be self-directed, and all of them can utilize self-control, can utilize checkbook control as well. So again, I just like to build a good base of knowledge for people when they come into this, especially it's new to a lot of people, to understand what types of accounts can be utilized in this particular type of investment structure, and a broader sense which ones can be self-directed as well. Now, when we say alternative assets, that can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. Now, in today's lexicon, maybe the most common type of alternative asset people think about maybe something like cryptocurrency. And while that certainly is an alternative asset and something that people do gravitate towards, in the much more broader sense, the types of alternative assets that we're really kind of focusing on, and not that we can't accommodate people that want to invest in cryptocurrencies and the like, but alternative assets in the more traditional sense are going to be things like real estate. So people that want to buy rental homes, commercial real estate, condos, duplexes. We have a lot of people working on private stock deals. I'm personally dealing with, I think, 2 or 3 different offerings right now for my clients that are investing into private stock in different companies. And those companies range in the scope of what they do, everything from fintech to biomedical to just general startup companies operating in different areas. You can buy that type of private stock within an IRA. Just did a podcast with a gentleman last week talking about doing investing in raw land and how he finances that with people's IRAs and also buys raw land with his IRA as well. So, you know, when people think about self-directed IRAs, normally they think just, you know, maybe some private stock or just a little piece of real estate. It really is incredibly broad. So if you have a desire and maybe have an investment in mind that you would like to do that is not necessarily something that is, you know, that is able to be held by a more traditional brokerage, the likelihood that you can do it within a self-directed IRA is high. But really the first step is, you know, kind of giving us a call. But I always like to kind of enumerate just some of the more common ones that we see. And certainly some of these things on here are not that common at all in the general sense, but it gives you an idea of what you can actually do with these. Okay, so now that we've understood, you know, generally what an IRA can do in a self-directed sense, what types of accounts can be self-directed, and what our general role is in this, let's kind of get to the topic at hand. What is a checkbook control IRA, and maybe what's the difference between a checkbook control IRA and just a self-directed IRA you might have with a custodian? So with a custodial or administrative account, the administrator, in this case Advanta, we would retain all the uninvested cash, we'd pay all the bills, we would process any investments directly. So if you had an investment you'd like to do, you would call up your account manager and say, hey, Hannah, I would like to buy a property at 123 Main Street. We would then start engaging with the seller's agent, the buyer's agent, the closing title company, real estate attorney, and get that whole process done and close within the IRA directly. Now, some people feel that might be a little bit too much of an arduous task. We understand that real estate moves quickly. Again, our account manager program is aimed to cut down on the administrative back and forth and be able to close and process deals in a timely manner. Our stated policy is documents received in good order. We can close anything within 48 hours. And sometimes we can certainly beat those expectations, but our stated policy is 48 hours from docs in good order. We can have something funded and closed for you. But keep in mind, there is some back and forth. And certainly there are some investment structures, and the one I like to pick on is real estate auctions, that really just necessitate having an almost immediate ability to pay, bid, and do things on a very fast pace. And certainly, although we work fast, being able to directly steer the ship and have complete control over that account will be a benefit to you in that scenario. And that's where some of the benefit to checkbook control comes in. You as the client are personally controlling everything with regard to the IRA. And we'll get into the structure of how this actually is attained here in a moment. But in a general sense, the normal way that most people go is having us do all the processing, have us hold the cash, process the investments, payments, and the like. With checkbook control, you as the client are personally responsible for all that. So through the entity that is set up, you would be writing any checks, you would be signing any closing documents, you would be, again, controlling everything that goes on with the account, and you are not having to involve Advanta in the day-to-day operations of the IRA. You take over complete control. You have control of that checkbook, kind of inherent in the name, and then you are able to issue any payments directly out of the account. You have a third-party bank account, and again, it runs. That's the general way that it runs. So there's two basic ways to achieve checkbook control, and I'll be honest, there is a significantly more popular of two avenues right here, and it would be the LLC. And namely, that is for the fact that the client, we would allow for you to be the manager of that LLC, meaning that you can write the checks, you can be steering that ship completely. You don't have to have a third party step in and do those operations for you. So the two main avenues that people utilize would be the LLC and the trust. So in this scenario, the checkbook control is attained by setting up one of these two entities and having the IRA be plugged in as either the member of an LLC, so think about it as the primary shareholder owning the entirety of that LLC, or being the grantor, meaning the entity adding the capital into the trust, and also the beneficiary of any actions and investments of that trust as well. So in either scenario, The IRA would be the quote owner of the particular entity that is set up, and it does need to be a newly formed entity. One thing I do run into clients in an initial onboarding call would be, hey, I'd like to do checkbook control. Okay, great. You can either use an LLC or a trust. Hey, I want to use an LLC. And they say, hey, I already have the LLC set up. Well, that's all well and good, but from a strictly fundamental perspective, the IRA needs to be acquiring newly issued shares of this LLC. And if it's already been set up and maybe already funded by you, those aren't newly issued shares. And you're going to run into issues with the IRS's prohibited transaction rules, which you can read ad nauseum in Internal Revenue Code 4975 to kind of detail where those particular issues might be. So to kind of come back to a landing here, the two ways that you can attain checkbook control, trust in an LLC, trusts or LLCs, you can, and by extension, Advanta will allow you to be the manager of an LLC. You cannot be the trustee of a trust because a trustee does qualify as a fiduciary, and you are prohibited from acting as in a fiduciary capacity to your IRA. The check writing through that entity is either done by the manager or the trustee. The title of all asset ownership is going to be in the name of one of those two entities. So the account is set up, the IRA is set up, the LLC is basically funneled underneath of the IRA or the trust, and then the assets go underneath of that subsequent entity. So that's kind of how the layering works. IRA owns the entity owns the assets, and then any cash flows or items of administration are taken care of by the IRA owner as manager or trustee for the trust downstream from there. Advanta is not strictly involved on anything afterwards from there. And now that we're kind of getting into a little bit more of the granular aspects of what checkbook control is, if you have any questions at all, maybe they skip ahead a little bit or maybe it's a little bit farther back, feel free to type those in. And keep in mind, I do see them. If I don't immediately answer, it's because it's probably on another slide and I'll address it. So what are some key components of trusts if you're going to go that route in a checkbook control scenario? So there's many different kinds of trusts. There's 50 different states in the United States, and they all have their own trust laws. In most cases, people just utilize some type of personal property trust, and typically it's going to be some type of revocable trust as well. So with that said, I'll kind of go through the trust aspects a little bit quicker because, again, I would say probably 90% of our clients elect to go the LLC route, but there's many different kinds of trusts. The parties in a trust, if you're going with checkbook control, you have the grantor, which contributes the assets to the trust, the trustee, which think about it in a comparison to an LLC, would be the manager of the trust, and then the beneficiary, which would be the IRA. So in this instance, the IRA acts in two capacities, the grantor and the beneficiary of a trust. And again, that's a little bit more of a technical explanation of it, but it's good to understand if you want to go the trust route. Those are kind of some of the key components that are baked into utilizing this type of entity for checkbook control. And since we're about to move on, question is, does the organization fee paid to the state have to come out of IRA funds? So what is being asked here is that when you set up a LLC, you have to register it with a particular state. You have to file articles of organization. You'll have some type of certificate of good standing that has to be maintained on an annual basis with the LLC, and there's a fee for that. And it ranges all over the place, from the low end of maybe 90 to 100 bucks up to maybe $800-900, depending on what state you're in. And you don't have to do this. You don't have to register it in the state that you live in as well. But with that said, does the registration fee for that need to come out of the IRA funds? Ideally, yes. The LLC could directly pay it out of the coffers of the LLC directly. That wouldn't be bad. And let's just file through a few more questions. Let's see, if I use an operating agreement from a previous checkbook IRA LLC as a model for the new one, would this be considered a prohibited transaction? That wouldn't necessarily be for us to say. I can't necessarily give the definitive answer on that. Do I see it as something inherently very problematic? No, but at the same time, if you're asking us for a definitive answer on it, it's just not something we could say yes or no on. But as far as the things that I see as being inherently problematic or restrictive from an IRS standpoint, I don't see that being too much of an issue. But again, I would always need to defer you to tax and legal to do that. And does an LLC handle the RMDs? No. And we'll get into kind of some of the cash flows a little bit later on, but strictly speaking, the RMDs would never be paid to you directly. And as a broad term, there is never a scenario where a trust or an IRA-owned LLC would ever write you a check personally. Hard stop, that's it. The LLC or the trust is never going to personally write you a check. And then we'll kind of get into that a little bit later on. And can I prepare the tax returns for a multi-member IRA LLC myself, not compensated, or would this be a prohibited transaction? Again, a little bit too granular for me to say yes or no. Would it be a prohibited transaction? Again, the LLC has actions that need to be taken in a strictly administrative sense. If you're not being paid or compensated for just maintaining the asset, is it inherently a big issue? I would think maybe on the scale of things, probably not, but check with tax or legal counsels. And okay, we'll pause it here. And the last one is there a court case that raises the question about the use of LLCs? Yes, and we'll get to that in a little bit. All right, so moving on. And again, I see some other people typing in questions. I will get to those in a minute. I just don't like to get too far off the rails in these presentations, but great questions, keep them coming. I will address those in a minute. Key components of trusts, again, personal property trusts, land trusts. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time on that because it's just, again, not too widely used, but just as a matter of thoroughness, you can use them. But let's focus on the LLC because that's probably why most of you are here. Key components of an LLC. These are the important ones to remember. So in the construct of what an LLC is, you're going to have members. These are going to be the shareholders, the equity holders, the owners. And in a very simple sense, if you have a single IRA and you want to do checkbook control, the IRA would be the 100% member shareholder of that particular LLC. It would be named as the non-managing member. It would just be a straight member. And these operating agreements do need to be manager managed, not member managed, because if it was member managed, that means Advanta would have to be signing checks and doing everything, and you wouldn't have checkbook control at that point. So it needs to be a manager managed single member LLC. Now you could certainly have multiple members, and we'll get into that a little bit later on, but on a very high level to kind of introduce you to this concept, you have, again, several parts of this key components of this. You have the members, which would be the IRA. The manager, think about it as the officer, the president, the person, again, steering the ship. And that's going to be you more often than not. Again, we do allow for you to be the IRA owner, to be the manager of the IRA-owned LLC. You're the one signing checks, doing everything. You're making the decisions. And then you also have the operating agreement. Now, where I do see a little bit of confusion is that people come to me after they've opened the account and say, hey, look, I got my LLC set up. And I'll say, great, awesome. Send me over all the documents. And they'll just send me a copy of the registration with the state. They've applied for the tax ID number, they've registered with their state. And on a very high level, that's all you need to have an LLC. But that's not all we need to have the LLC set up in the IRA. You need to have an operating agreement. The articles that you register with the state are not an operating agreement. Operating agreements are going to list all of the kind of operational standards of that LLC. It's going to list the member, which is going to be the IRA. It's going to list the management, which most often or not will be the client. And it'll list all the other kind of operational details that are going to govern the actions of that LLC. And that's really what we're looking for. Granted, we certainly don't mind getting a copy of the articles, but on a very high level, we don't need the articles in order to fund the LLC. So some checkbook IRA and LLC rules. The LLC has to be manager managed. Again, it can't be member managed. It can include more than just the IRA, but ownership percentages are going to be based on the initial contribution. Now, this can look a few different ways. So if you have from the most simple to a little bit more complex, single IRA, it's 100% IRA owned. It's a single member LLC. It's kind of what we'll look up the nomenclature of. Single member LLC. There's only one owner, so it doesn't matter if it's one share valued at $100,000 or $1 a share, whatever the amount of capital that is put in, and it's 100% owned by that LLC. Now, when you start adding multiple members in it, you do start adding a few layers of complexity. One, you have to determine, and typically this would be on something what's called like a Schedule A to the operating agreement, you'd have to list the members and their percentage of ownership. So if you had your IRA putting in $50,000 and you had another entity, whether that's someone else's IRA, someone else personally, it doesn't really necessarily matter. The percentages of ownership are going to be based dollar for dollar on the capital contribution. So if you both add in $50,000 to the LLC, then it would be 50% ownership in each, and that would need to be detailed. Now, let's say it was 70,000 from your IRA and 30,000 from someone else. Well, that's 70% to your IRA and 30% to the other party. It wouldn't be 50-50. And that is especially true if you're going to be partnering personal funds into this deal. And I highly recommend anytime that you start blending personal assets into an IRA LLC scenario as a partnership, which you can do, be very careful, do a lot of homework, ask a lot of questions, because just setting it up correctly isn't the whole picture. You can easily back into a prohibited transaction or do something prohibited significantly easier than if you just had only IRA funds or non-disqualified third parties involved in the particular entity. But on a high level with what I'm saying, however much money is added into a deal determines what percentage of ownership that a particular entity or person would have within that LLC operating agreement. Additional capital contributions can be a problem with multi-member LLCs because the percentages of ownership, if you are going to be personally involved, absolutely have to remain the same. So if your IRA, or let's say there's a need for additional capital in the LLC, and again, this holds true with a trust as well, but the core focus today is going to be on the Checkbook Control LLC, would be that you need to make sure that the capital is added in the same ratio. So if it's a 50-50 ownership and there's a $20,000 additional need for capital in that LLC, well, the IRA is going to have to be able to contribute an additional $10,000. Now that's over the annual contribution limit. So if you don't have funds in another 401k or another IRA, and you don't have the ability to contribute to bring the cash reserves of the IRA up to make that contribution, it can be a pretty sticky situation. So again, these things, especially when you start adding in multiple members, are going to be, the complexity scale is going to be a little bit of an exponential growth curve. So just keep that in mind. If you want to have multiple people involved, there's some additional conversations that need to be had. It's not just saying, oh, well, bring them in, that's fine. Just do your homework, talk to us. We're more than happy to give you as much information as that you would like on this. And again, going back to where you're going to see some issues, the prohibited transaction rulings are going to be found in Internal Revenue Code 4975. People often kind of just talk about it as 4975. So if you hear 4975 thrown around, if you're doing your research, that's the Internal Revenue Code dealing with prohibited IRA or retirement plan in general transactions. Now, while there is no inherent tax return if it's a single member entity, there are some tax updates for reporting as determined by FinCEN, which we'll get into. I think it's the next slide, might be one more. So in previous years, you did not have to basically do any federal tax reporting for single member LLCs. They were what's called a disregarded entity for the purposes of tax reporting. So for the most part, people, unless they had some specific engaged type of investments, they didn't really have to do much from a IRS reporting standpoint, but now you potentially do. And again, it's not for, well, we'll get into that in a minute. Also, if you are looking for liability protections, most of the time people, when it comes to checkbook control LLCs, are just looking for an administrative advantage, but inherently in the name, limited liability company, people have the idea that LLCs just carte blanche offer liability protection. That's not always the case. Especially in the state of Florida, the liability protections of entities are determined on a state level for the most part. So we got 50 different flavors. You always need to check, and you would need to also maybe talk to an attorney about where a case might be domiciled, because that could affect the liability protections. But in a general sense, single member LLCs do not always offer the same type of liability protections that multi-member partnerships do. So keep that in mind. If you're really kind of someone that is going down the path of wanting liability protections, you need to double check and see if your single member LLC is going to offer you what you think it is. Now, we did have a question on some court cases that kind of examine some of this stuff, and ask and ease shall receive. Let me just go through a couple of the questions before I get into the court cases, because those do typically get a bit in the weeds. Someone asked, I have a checkbook SD IRA with a custodian. I pay their yearly fees via my personal credit card. Am I to pay those fees from the self-directed IRA account? Whether it's a Roth or not has no bearing on your question, but the IRS is okay with you paying custodial fees personally. And I would say on a broad scope, almost all of our clients pay them personally instead of with tax qualified funds. Now, keep in mind, IRA custodial fees that, let's say, Advanta might charge are going to be different on a fundamental level than your annual registration fee to the state that the LLC is operating in. Those do need to be paid from the LLC directly, along with any other inherent expenses related to the IRA-owned assets, or I should say the LLC-owned assets. Think property taxes for a property, repairs for a property, a legal bill for drafting documents maybe related to a deal. Any of that kind of stuff all has to be paid from IRA funds. Discussing LLCs with disqualified persons. Yeah, we'll kind of get into that, but again, that's a little bit of a rabbit hole, but I'm certainly happy to kind of talk to that on a small track. And with single member LLCs having liability with put the IRA funds. Yeah, I mean, the owner of the LLC being the IRA, inherently, if the LLC gets sued and the owner is attached to it, that's who is getting sued in that sense. But while granted, lawsuits are certainly something to be concerned about in the big sense of what most people are investing with their IRAs. If you're investing in real estate, get good insurance, make sure the proper entity is insured, either the LLC or another beneficial owner, being a beneficial named insured being the IRA, not you personally. Don't cover the stuff under a personal liability umbrella, because that's a real quick way for an insurance policy to not pay. Most lawsuits typically are going to be settled with insurance so long as you have it. But again, not to diminish concerns about legal liability, just keep that in mind. So see, someone has their hand raised, so if you wouldn't mind typing in that question, just want to make sure that I stop this on the correct question so I can come back to them. Okay, great. So let's get into some court cases. So the big one that a lot of people try to point to as kind of the acceptance of IRA-owned LLCs is one back in 1996 called Swanson v. Commissioner. Basically, the IRS was trying to say that this LLC, this guy was self-dealing shares of an LLC to his IRA, and the kind of general construct is what a lot of this is based on, is that because it was a newly formed LLC, no one could have owned those shares that he had set up before the IRA purchased them. He had put no capital into the LLC. He had not done anything else that would say that he was selling personally owned assets to the IRA. They'd never been owned before. That stock certificate hadn't been filled out with a name on it. So that was kind of the umbrage that the IRS was taking. And when it went to court, it was it was determined that the client was right in their assumption. Now, I tell people to take the Swanson v. Commissioner case with a boulder-sized piece of salt. One, in further examination, he was potentially doing self-dealing with buying accounts receivable with the IRA-owned LLC from his personal company. He was also potentially paying himself managerial fees, which, again, big no-no. And he also, I mean, I can't recommend that people do this, but he also sued the IRS for his court costs. So, maybe he was painting a bit of a target on his back. I don't know if he ever was sued in tax court again, but again, just take that one with a bit of there's some a little bit of hyperbole in some of the things that happen in that. There was another tax court memo which is called TL Ellis, and basically inherent in what this one happened, and the client, the IRA owner, actually lost the case, but there was a few examination and opinion points that were offered in this that offer us some additional insight. Is that in this case, the IRA owner was acting as the manager of the LLC, and they were disqualifying him for actions performed as the manager. And specifically in that, he lost the case because he was paying himself management fees for acting as the manager of the LLC. But specific to that, the naming of the IRA client as manager was not problematic. It was him paying himself for doing that. So that's kind of, again, the examination of acting as the manager, where we can kind of see the IRS being potentially amenable to that. Again, these are just court cases. There might always be updates. We'll do our best to bring it out to you, but it's important to understand kind of, where we've come from with this. And one of the more recent ones was a case called US v. McNulty. And this one definitely raised some more questions that need to be addressed and should give people a little bit of pause when it comes to just carte blanche saying, yeah, let's do Checkbook LLCs. These are great, awesome, wonderful, because some of the language in the court case definitely raises some concerns. So essentially what happened is in the McNulty case, the clients had taken direct, and the exact word was unfettered access and control to IRA-owned assets. Well, some people would say that acting as the manager of an LLC bank account could qualify as that, not for us to say one way or another. But really what the IRS was examining is that these clients had purchased precious metals and decided to store them in their own vault in the basement of their house. And inherent with precious metals is that they're bearer instruments, meaning that, whoever holds it owns it. So inherent by just taking that, the IRA owners had taken improper distributions and stored these metals personally, which is, again, something I've never recommended to anyone, especially using an LLC, even though you are driving the ship. If you're going to invest in precious metals, use a depository. We can give you some that it can certainly do the job just fine. So again, that one was one of the more recent ones, US v. McNulty, and it raises some of those concerns. Now the clients try to say, well, we weren't necessarily aware, and we were told by this person, and the IRS, the US government specifically said, ignorance of the law and not doing enough research on your end does not absolve you of, the violations that you've committed. So it really kind of goes back to a core focus of what I like to do professionally is, one, educate people, but two, encourage people to trust and verify. We can't advise you. Don't take anything that we're saying as a, firm advisory opinion. There are attorneys, there are tax advisors out there that can give you firm opinions that you can, stand on, licensed individuals. We're just here to give you the broad concepts and draw your attention to where you might want to do some additional research. So those are kind of the three big cases that I like to draw people's attention to in the checkbook control realm, if you will. Okay, so some prohibited transactions, and I see there are a few more questions. We'll get to those in a second. So what can you not invest in with an IRA? Can't buy life insurance, can't buy anything that's collectible. Pretty easy. Stay away from those two things. There are some prohibited transactions, meaning you can't buy or sell anything to or from yourself. And kind of going back to that Swanson v. Commissioner case, you can't. And also my point to that, if you have a personally owned LLC, you can't use that for your IRA. You can't sell anything to your IRA. And that also extends to certain individuals in your immediate nuclear family. They're called disqualified persons, people you just can't deal with on a transactional basis. You can potentially partner with them, and a gentleman or someone on the chat did ask that question, and we'll get a little bit into that. But keep in mind there are certain people you can't deal with. The easiest way to stay safe with this is deal at arm's length. Don't deal with your immediate family, notwithstanding that it can cause some really awful Thanksgiving dinners. It's just something to be cognizant of, that there are issues with that. And then there are also some instances where if you own an active trade or business within an IRA, or subsequently like a Checkbook Control LLC, there might be some potentially taxable situations. And also if you debt finance a purchase of an asset, whether that be real estate or something else, through an IRA-owned LLC or through an IRA in general, you could also expose the account to taxes as well. Let's go through this and then I'll get some questions. So I mentioned that there are some updates this year. So in 2021, Congress passed the Corporate Transparency Act, or the CTA. This is in effect as of January 1. So the Financial Crimes Enforcement Unit, or FinCEN, so you'll probably see FIN capital CEN if you're doing some research on LLC reporting out there. So keep in mind that you are potentially, and again, I have to very firmly, and I'll disclaim it again, this is something you would need to check with a qualified attorney, or someone qualified to do this type of reporting for LLCs as to specifically what information and how to actually file this. But we feel that at Advanta, it's good to bring you the information, and you as the client need to determine what, how, and if you are needing to do this. But in a general sense, our interpretation is that any checkbook, LLC, or corporation owned by an IRA, HSA, or other retirement plan is required to file the beneficial ownership information, or the BOI report. These entities' managers, managing members, general partners, or presidents are responsible for filing the appropriate reports, meaning that you as the client, if you're acting as the manager, or if you engage a CPA or some other type of entity or individual to help you out with this, that is the responsible party for it. Advanta would not be doing that type of reporting for the IRA-owned LLC. So again, this is new as of 31 days ago that this requirement is out there. So do some more research. Make sure you understand what exactly needs to be done, and we'll be bringing out some more experts as we kind of determine how much information we can give specifically on how to do it. We'll probably have some experts or an attorney on to talk about it on a bit more granular level, but it was important for us to at least put this in here because it certainly does apply to these types of investments. Okay. Let's get some questions knocked out. With the single member LLC having liability, we covered that one. Okay, someone asked, it cost me $5 to open my business account for my LLC and $16 for the checks. It came out of my own money. After I funded the LLC, I reimbursed myself the $21. This was a wash, but will the IRS look at it as a contribution or a distribution? I would, it's hard to say. With something so small, I would just, check with someone that can advise you on it, because, was it the correct way to do it? Potentially not, but, again, there's really kind of no remedy that I could give you directly on a webinar. So, maybe give me a call afterwards, or, check with another, qualified individual for that. To set up an LLC, does it require an attorney specializing in self-directed IRAs? Not particularly, just someone that is familiar with LLCs would be a good start, because at the end of the day, there's really no bespoke stuff that needs to go into it in general, besides just the name of the member and how the management is titled. Granted, would you want an LLC that includes some provisions about court cases and some additional disclosures? Potentially. Again, it's not for us to say we don't require it, but using someone that's familiar with self-directed IRAs, is it a bad thing? Absolutely not. Do you have to do it? Also no. Let's see. What about storage in a bank vault? I don't know what SBD means. With the new CTA law, beneficial ownership reporting, the Treasury Department says that tax-exempt entities are exempt from the reporting requirement. Would that include an LLC that is owned by a Roth IRA? Again, we've read the law, and I've read through it as well. I don't necessarily know if that would hold muster. I think they're probably going more along the lines of like charities, churches, and things like that with that statement. Because this is such a specialized niche, I wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable saying yes or no one way or on that. So, take that for what it's worth. And again, with this kind of stuff being new, it's hard to say. We have to see how it plays out with the IRS providing updates and the like. So we'll see. But as far as we interpret it right now, we want to make sure clients know that the way that it looks to us is that you would need to do this. And let's see, the last one before we keep going. Who is the member of this type of LLC? Is the entity with my Roth IRA, or just myself as an individual? I mean, it depends who's adding money into that LLC. If it's just the IRA, then just the IRA would be the member. If you're also adding money in, then you would be a member in a partnership with your IRA on that LLC. So again, it just kind of depends on the facts of the situation. All right, moving right along, because got a little long-winded on some of these. So self-directed IRA rules, I mentioned, dealing with your immediate nuclear family on a transactional basis, so meaning buying, selling, anything to or from these people is disqualified. You can partner with them, but keep in mind that brings up its own potential set of risks and issues. Okay, thanks. So keeping stuff in a safe deposit box at a local bank, the problem is that how do you get something like precious metals or something into that bank vault? Are you going to walk it in there? Which again, that's taking direct possession of something like precious metals. You know, if you could have it shipped to the bank, they could hold it in the name of the LLC and then you would never have to touch it. I doubt a bank that has safe deposit boxes would offer that kind of service. There are depository services out there that specialize in this kind of thing that I would recommend people use more than just a local bank with a safe deposit box. Again, if you could feel comfortable in doing it compliantly, but I just think functionally of how do you even get it in there, you got to pick it up and walk it in there. And that's kind of the issue that McNulty ran into, McNulty ran into in that case. So there. Okay, 3 ways to structure a real estate deal. Let's get cracking on this. So purchasing real estate with an IRA, not using checkbook control. Joe has 150 in traditional IRA assets. He's interested in investing in real estate. Joe decides to invest in a single family rental, finds one for 100, and man, I need to update the figures on this to maybe be a little bit post-COVID. Anyway, so finds a house for 100, needs 20 of work to get it ready. He'll projects it'll net $1,000 a month after repairs. So how can Joe buy this property? So directly through the IRA. So what does this look like functionally? Joe opens the IRA, completes the application, transfers funds from the existing IRA he has. Account number is open in 24 hours or less. The contract is in the name of the IRA. Again, this is assuming we're not doing checkbook control, right? I just want to flesh out the 3 options that we got here. So contract's written in the name of the IRA. Advanta IRA, FBO, Joe Smith IRA 1234. Joe approves everything. We execute it. We issue the escrow deposit. All the documents from the deed, HUD, tax prorations, estoppels, title policies, all going to be in the name of the IRA. And then Joe read and approves all the documents. We have to execute everything. Afterwards, we wire the funds to closing. Joe directs that all the expenses, so taxes, maintenance, insurance, are paid from the Advanta IRA cash, which he can do directly on his IRA portal with Advanta. And then he tracks all the investments, expenses directly through, again, his portal. He has account statements and the like. And then in the sale, again, sale is just a purchase in reverse. All the funds come directly back in from the closing to the IRA. There's no tax reporting that is needed on that. It just sale of an asset, cash comes back in, and then Joe could potentially just rinse, wash, and repeat. Now, using an LLC, again, functionally, nothing really changes in regard to, you know, what you're doing with the investment of buying property, but the structuring of how the IRA engages with it certainly is different. So just as with the normal purchase directly through the IRA, Joe has to open an IRA, completes our application, transfers money from the old 401k or IRA, but instead of the IRA custodian, in this case Advanta, coordinating the closing directly, we would be focused on the LLC. So Joe chooses the state to set the LLC up in. Does not need to be your own state that you live in. Doesn't need to be Florida as well. You can pick whichever one you like. Most people choose one in the Southeast United States because they're cheap and have low reporting overhead, but feel free to choose whichever one you want. And also get advised because certain investments you might need to have an LLC that is in a certain state pertaining to yourself or the investment provider. Again, that's not for us to say, but suffice it to say is that you can, there's no requirement to do it in your home state or Advanta's home state of Florida. Choose the name of the LLC, find someone or, file the articles. Joe or another individual is going to file those articles as the manager or interested party. And the articles don't need to mention the IRA. The only place that the IRA needs to be referenced on is the operating agreement. And that, again, is a separate document in its entirety from the articles. Now, this operating agreement, the IRA is listed as 100% owner. The operating agreement must show the IRA as the member, and the IRA is named Advanta IRA FBO John Smith 800-123. So that's how the front end of the LLC looks. So what happens then? We have to sign the operating agreement as the member. Joe signs as the manager of that LLC on the operating agreement. The LLC bank account's name is, the bank accounts open up in the name of the LLC. Joe, in this case, as the manager of the LLC, signs the contract to purchase, signs all the closing documents, and then going forward, all checks for rents and any checks from the tenant as far as rent or income from the property is deposited to the LLC. Joe pays all the expenses directly from the LLC, so insurance, maintenance, taxes, filing fees to the state are all paid from by the LLC. And then if the property sells, it goes to the LLC and you can reinvest from there. Since we're running a little short on time and there's some questions I'd like to give a little bit extra clarity to here in a minute, the trust basically works in the exact same way, except for the fact that Joe cannot be the trustee. So the third party is going to have to sign as the trustee on that trust document, and then they sign all of the checks. And Advanta would not be the trustee. So again, not nearly as popular of an option, but I like to put it out there because it's important to understand that you're not just locked into one avenue on checkbook control. It could be a lot of different, it could be, not a lot, it could be two different things basically, a trust or an LLC. Again, trust, I might see 2 a year. LLCs, I see maybe 3 or 4 a week. So not to say that those people are more right or wrong than each other, it's just a more popular option. But in this case, again, we won't spend too much time on it. Again, basically the exact same thing as an LLC, with the exception of the documents and the fact that the document names and the fact that Joe cannot be the trustee or quote the manager of that trust. But again, the operations basically work the same. The trust would close, the property would close in the name of the trust. Any expenses are paid for to and from that trust account, and then the reinvestment would happen from there. So how to move cash from an LLC or trust. And this goes into my statement earlier, is that there's never an instance where your IRA owned LLC or trust should ever write you a check personally. And going back, it was kind of in the beginning asking about RMDs, or required minimum distributions, which is the required distribution from pre-tax retirement accounts for individuals of or above the age of 72 from pre-tax accounts. Roth accounts don't have this. So think SEP IRAs, traditional 401ks, simple IRAs have required minimum distributions. In this case, the way it works is that the checkbook control entity, the LLC or the trust, would write a check back to Advanta IRA, and then we would distribute those funds to you personally. So that way, one, the proper chain of custody is maintained on the funds, and two, the proper tax reporting is done to you for taking those required minimum distribution funds from the account. So that is very important. It's, again, one of those easy things to overlook, but also a very easy thing to do. So making sure that it's done correctly is very important. So if you have an RMD, or if you ever want to transfer money to, let's say, another IRA custodian, you want to just, anything that needs to move out of Advanta in any regard. So whether that's a distribution to you personally, whether that is a transfer of cash to another IRA, basically the only time that you write checks out of this LLC is for buying an investment or maintaining an investment. Those are the two things that go out of the LLC. Transfers out, distributions to you, all have to come back to Advanta first. So from the LLC account to Advanta to you or the other custodian is how that would work. So partnering funds. We did have a question about partnering funds. You can partner funds on checkbook control LLCs. So you could have multiple members of an LLC. That's not a problem. You do have tax reporting that needs to be done to the IRS when that happens, because you have to file a partnership return for the LLC. That's something that a single member LLC doesn't inherently have to do. Now, again, that is different from the beneficial owner report that is now being required to be done. It's a actual tax return for the LLC. So if you have multiple members, you're no longer considered a single member entity. You are a multi-member entity. You are a partnership. So you would have some things that need to be reported to the IRS. You can have potentially partners that are disqualified. So if you wanted to have, let's say, your children invested in an LLC that your IRA was a member of, or you wanted to partner with your spouse, your husband and wife or partners want to partner their IRA into an LLC, that can potentially be done as well. But specifically going back to my statement about the being very careful with that, percentages of ownership absolutely cannot change if you have disqualified individuals partnered on an LLC. And furthermore to that, just if you're thinking being careful enough, be even more careful than that, because running afoul of this in a big sense can disqualify the entire retirement account of the individual that engages in a prohibited transaction. And not to say that the IRS examines these any closer than anything else, but if the risk is basically a nuclear option for your IRA, be very careful. I think it kind of goes without saying. But in this case, with multiple parties it can make managing the investments less cumbersome. You can have more capital into the LLC. That certainly is an option for that. When you bring in more people, you bring in more money, the types of investments that you can get or acquire can certainly expand. So the benefits of doing it can certainly be present, but you just need to be very careful if you are dealing with disqualified individuals. So what are some benefits and drawbacks? We're getting right to the end of it, and I will address any questions that I haven't answered here in a moment. So the pros of going directly through the IRA and not using checkbook control: it's easier to keep arm's length from the IRA funds. We're handling all the funds, we're writing all the checks, we're signing all the documents. It is about as arm's length as it gets. So just that's something to keep in mind. You could be less likely to engage in a prohibited transaction. Again, that is a very high level statement. It's just kind of a fact of, if we're going to be looking at everything, the small things are easy for us to catch. Granted, we're not reviewing things on such a microscopic level to give you an advisory opinion of whether or not something is prohibited, but easy things stand out. Let's say you submitted a reimbursement request because you had paid some expenses personally for an IRA-owned asset. We wouldn't reimburse you for something like that. It's easy to kind of keep a little bit more above board with some things. And again, the rules aren't inherently too terribly complex, but understanding them, abiding by them is important. And you also get the record keeping capacity of Advanta. So any check that's written, any check that comes in, any expense payment request, any closing document, we maintain all of those records for you. So you get that added benefit of engaging us directly for that. The cons: you do have the potential for maybe some more administrative fees, and I won't go too far into that except for just making that statement. If you have more questions, feel free to follow up with me. And you don't have ability to write checks for immediate purchases like you do with checkbook control. Checkbook control, you have quick access to IRA funds for things like auctions. You can hold more assets with lower fees and potentially have the additional layer of asset protection. You always need to check with an attorney, see if the structure of your LLC does even offer liability protection, or if it's treated as a pass-through for liability actions in your particular state. Some of the cons: you're responsible for the record keeping of accurate records. You do have some lack of oversight by the IRA administrator, which can help keep you a little bit safer, and it potentially is a little bit easier to engage in prohibited transactions. Which strategy is best for you? That's a personal question you need to answer. Consult with an attorney or a CPA. Most clients do choose to have us just hold the IRA assets directly, but I think it would be fair to say an increasing number of people are looking to the checkbook control option. Is that a good or a bad thing? Are they getting the real amount of benefit from that, or would they be better off with Advanta doing it? I don't know, but it's, again, something for you to kind of look at objectively and see if it's a good fit. I would say give us a call, talk about what you're looking at doing, and someone like myself or my colleagues can kind of go through and kind of identify where you might see some benefit, or in some instances, it might just be an additional layer of expense and you really wouldn't see a particular benefit from going checkbook control. It's not carte blanche that it is across the board always going to be beneficial to you. All right. So if you are interested in getting more information, we do have a lot of great events. We have bi-weekly webinars. I host our podcast every Wednesday, which as of this Wednesday, we just crossed over our 100th episode. So I'm very happy to have crossed that milestone. We also do catalog all of this on YouTube and maintain an up-to-date blog as well. If you'd like to get started, it's a very easy process. You just need to complete an account application. Funds can be transferred or roll over typically within about a week or so, and then we can get started with investments for you. I'll leave it here for my contact information, and I will start firing through some questions. Feel free to drop any questions that you still have in there. I will just be answering questions from here on out because that is the end of the presentation. So thanks for joining with us. Okay, let's see, someone asked, is there any reason that one couldn't have both the LLC checkbook and the trust checkbook? Maybe need a little bit of additional clarity. You typically wouldn't have both a trust and an LLC. If you're asking the question from the context of why couldn't the IRA owner in the trust scenario also be the trustee and hold that checkbook, it's because a trustee qualifies as a fiduciary and the IRS prohibits you from acting in a strict fiduciary capacity to your IRA asset. If I open an LLC and have to change the owner of the property within the city, as I did when I switched, if I open an LLC, do I have to change the owner of the property in the city? Yeah, so in that context, for who asked that question, if the IRA own a property and you transferred that property from another custodian to Advanta, and now Advanta is the owner of record, or Advanta, for benefit of your IRA, is the owner of record on the deed. If you wanted to put that into an LLC, there would need to be another quitclaim deed that would transfer the ownership from Advanta into the IRA-owned LLC. Do we have a sample operating agreement? No, we can't do any legal document drafting for our clients. That would need to be something that you get from some type of outside source from Advanta. We certainly do have a book of business that we can refer you to. We don't have anything other than just a good working relationship with these people. Use them, don't use them. We don't see a dime if you use their services or not, and we're happy to work with whomever, but we cannot provide you that legal document for your IRA. Let's see, regarding trusts and LLC options, I already have the trust and may not want to move all the assets over to the LLC. Again, I'm a little confused on how that is worded. So if you already have an IRA-owned trust, are you basically just saying you want to move? Yeah, I mean, if I'm understanding this correctly, if the assets are in the name of the trust, and you'd like to move to an LLC, basically all the assets would have to be retitled in the name of the LLC. And ideally, they would need to first come from the trust to Advanta and then from Advanta to the LLC. So depending on what you have in there, if it's something other than cash, that could be a little bit cumbersome. Not, insurmountable, but certainly not as straightforward as, some other things might be. All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for the questions. Again, let me just check and see how we're doing on attendees. Yeah, if there's any other questions, I'll keep it open for another few moments, and we'll go from there. But again, thank you, everyone, for joining with us today. Hope you got some good value out of your time you spent with us, and fantastic questions as well. All right, well, I don't see any other questions coming in. If you do want, the slides are a handout on here, so you can snag those. If you do have any questions, feel free to give me a ring. I would ask, though, if you do have questions, give me a call, but later on this afternoon. A lot of times people will call me right after these things wrap up. I do have another meeting I'm stepping into here till about 3 o'clock. So please, if you do need to give me a call, just give me a call a little bit later. Happy to help you out. With that said, thank you so much for joining with us. I always really enjoy doing these things. I hope it comes through in the content that y'all got, and have a great day.